Assalamu alaikum. How are you today? I hope you're fine. Have you heard of Genghis Khan? He was a Mongol warrior. And his name, according to the literature, was actually Chinggis. And somehow it later changed to Genghis Khan. And he became famous because he brought together the Mongol tribes in Central Asia. And he taught them to fight on horseback. They in the steppes of East Asia, they had horses that was indigenous to their area, but they were smaller horses than the horses that are known in Arabia. And these horses covered amazing distances with their short legs. The Mongols trained to ride them standing, and they stood all the way. They would ride for 16 to 18 hours at a gallop, and they covered vast areas of land. Genghis Khan brought all the tribes together. He united all of them under his rule. And he always said that he was inspired by God because the Mongols at the time, they had their own religion, and they worshipped some spirit which lived in the sky, and they had their own name for God. And Genghis Khan swept across Asia, and they were renowned for their horrific violence that they would mete out to anybody that they came across. And it was a tactic of his because he would threaten them and let them know that he's on their doorstep and he's about to invade their town or their village. And most of them would just give up without a fight. The ones who did fight, they always lost and they were slaughtered to the person. They would kill cats and dogs and women and everybody, every single person. And they would cut heads off and pile the heads up in huge heaps. And they would let certain people free to run, escape, let them go, to spread the news about what the Mongols did and how they did it. And in this way, Genghis Khan was extremely successful. And what he eventually succeeded in doing is creating the biggest empire of all time, ever, in Genghis Khan's time. And then succeeding Genghis Khan, his grandson came about, who also became, like his grandfather, a great statesman and a great warrior. And he continued his father's um, marauding, and he extended his father's empire to make it even bigger. So he made the biggest empire ever even bigger. What happened was that the Mongol Empire after Kublai Khan, who's the grandson, only really lasted for 150 years. So if we take 25 years as being one generation, then it lasted for six generations, and then it just dissipated into nothing. And the Mongols actually got assimilated into the Muslim civilization. So the people that they conquered, they got assimilated into the people that they conquered, not the other way around. That is one of the strange facts of history. Normally, the conquered nation gets assimilated into the conquerors, people. But in the case of the Mongols, the conquerors, got assimilated into Muslim culture and the Islamic way of life. And in fact, the Mongols, they all became Muslim, all of them, to a T. In fact, many of the Mongol generals actually instructed their entire sub-armies to become Muslim. And they would start learning and doing everything uh, under Muslim tutelage. The Mongols were a nomadic tribe, and so when they eventually invaded Muslim land. And the Mongols, by the way, they razed Baghdad to the ground. They flattened it. All the buildings were flattened. They killed everybody because the Mongol Khalif at the time, he refused. He actually laughed. If I stand corrected, but I think he beheaded the Mongol ambassadors to Baghdad because they came to him with terms of surrender. And he laughed at them, he beheaded them, and he sent their heads back to to the land of the Mongols. And then they came back and they destroyed Baghdad. And in fact, just before Genghis Khan beheaded the Khalif in Baghdad, just before he did that, he said to the Khalif, I am the wrath of God sent down on you because you are not living a proper Muslim life. That's what he said, something to that extent. I forget the exact words now. But the Mongols conquered the entire eastern part of the Muslims where they came into contact with them, the eastern borders, right up to and including Baghdad, which was the center of Islam at that time. Of course, Islam spread a lot further to the west, but to the east they spread all the way into China. And many of you might not know how early Islam got to China. There is, in fact, a old masjid that was built around about the year 400 Hijrah. That's 400 years after the Hijrah. Not in the year 400 AD, Anno Domini, but in the year 400 Hijrah. That's how early Muslims were in China. And I was in China twice, and there you can actually see Arabs or Chinese of Arab descent. They have Arab features, but they speak Mandarin and they live with the Chinese, but they have never ever intermarried. So they've kept their Arab blood, although they dress and they speak Mandarin, and they live like the Chinese Muslim people live, with their shops at the bottom and the houses at the top. Very nice setup that they have in a lot of the Chinese Muslim cities. So even though the Mongols and the Muslims competed to conquer China, the Mongols succeeded in doing it. And they also succeeded in invading Muslim lands to the west of China. So along the eastern borders of Muslim lands, the Mongols invaded. But the interesting fact that I've mentioned earlier on is the Mongols all became Muslim, all of them. So where does this nonsense about Islam was spread by the sword come from? How is it? I mean, it's not as if the Muslims rebelled after being conquered and then reconquered the Mongols and forced them to become Muslim at the point of a sword. This is the conquerors watching how Muslims live and then deciding to adopt their religion. Because even though Baghdad was wiped off the face of the earth, everybody was killed in Baghdad, the same thing never happened in other Muslim cities. Those Muslims capitulated, they surrendered, and so they were spared, their lives that is. But then they were employed to continue doing the administration of the towns that they were doing, because the Mongols had no knowledge of administrating towns. They were nomads. So they kept the Muslims there. And after years of watching the way Muslims work, they themselves became Muslim. All of them. They just adopted Islam. The same thing happened in Malaysia, Indonesia. Exactly the same thing. No Muslim army ever went there. And the Malays today are all Muslim, all of them. All the Malaysians, all the Indonesians, they now have two different countries. In fact, there's three because Brunei is also a Malay country. But they are all Muslim. And they all adopted Islam out of observance and out of learning and of seeing the way that Arab Muslim traders conducted themselves. It was through their character that they became Muslim. So this fallacy of Islam being spread by the sword, a lot of nonsense. Salam alaikum.